Ichimon Japan is made possible by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that we can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month.
So she drew a picture of this like serious kind of angry looking samurai riding a wounded peasant who's like bleeding on the ground, almost like a Yoshi in Mario.
Welcome to Ichimon Japan. I'm Tony and
I'm Ryan.
And today we are once again joined by Kyle Broyles of the Tokyo Explosion podcast, whom you may remember from episodes 13 and 14 of Ichimon Japan. It's great to have you back on, Kyle.
Hey, everybody. It's a tremendous joy to be back.
Oh, that's so nice. That's so nice. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Tokyo Explosion is one of my favorite Japan-focused podcasts. Everybody should check it out. It's always
much better
a delight
than
to
this
listen
one.
to. It's much better. Jeez, Ryan is my harshest critic.
I have my hand to my chest right now, just feeling the warmth in my heart. Thank you.
I always get happy when I see a new podcast episode of Tokyo Explosion come out, because I know you guys are quarterly, so it's a little bit, rarer to get a new episode. But when you get one, it's always, an absolute pleasure to listen to. So looking forward to that.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you to say.
Yeah. Link in the show notes, of course, at the website, japankyo.com/Ichimon Japan as well. But let's get into today's episode. So Ichimon means one question. And every episode we ask one question about Japan. Today's question is, do you have any funny or embarrassing Japanese mistake stories? Part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So
Studio applause.
I'm late, but I'm here.
Studio applause, yes. Hey, patch, 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 patch. So a little while ago, we did the first one, and that was a fun episode with Kasha of Ikigai Connections, and we had a great time there, and I asked for some listener submissions, which we did get, and so I wanted to bring on somebody else to see if they had any funny Japanese mistake stories, and so Kyle is here.
Yes.
So, yes.
I have plenty.
Okay. So I have I think I can share one more, but let's start with Kyle first, and then we'll get into mine and some of the listener submissions as well. So Kyle, what story can you share with us?
Okay, I'll start off. I think this happened my very first visit to Japan. So my wife is Japanese. We were both in graduate school at the time in the US. Mm-hmm. And before she graduated, we came to visit her family. She's from Machida in Tokyo. And so we were staying in Machida, and I think I had some, especially at the time, I think now Japan is becoming a little bit more like you can pay more with cards and you can use e-money and stuff, but still cash is pretty important in Japan. So I think I had some US dollars that I needed to convert, and we went to a bank in Machida, and I filled out the forms, and, my wife helped me with some of the trickier parts, and I got my money back, finished the exchange. And when I was leaving, I wanted to say, in the U.S., the small talk is, especially where I'm from in Indiana in the Midwest, small talk is like a must, Yeah. You're always commenting on the weather or wishing people a nice day or thanking them, whatever. And I didn't really know what to say, but I wanted to be sure to thank this person for taking their time to help me. And so I got my forms, put my stuff away, and I said, sayonara, and walked away. And the whole bank burst out laughing because I was still very new to Japanese. That was probably my first interaction with a stranger in Japanese, outside of a school setting. Uh-huh. I was a little bit flustered from that. And sayonara, of course, it's it means goodbye, but it's a very intense, dramatic, farewell.
Yes.
So I said that, and I really everybody in the bank was laughing, and my wife says that teller probably still occasionally thinks of the weird foreigner who said sayonara, and hopefully it was a bright spot in her day.
Yeah. I mean, we did an episode about that, about how sayonara isn't necessarily just something you say in most occasions. I mean, in some cases you can, and it's okay, but yes, like you said, it can have this sort of heavier meaning to it, especially something like farewell or a little bit more final, especially in your intonation. And if you say it to somebody like in the service industry where you wouldn't have to be like necessarily formal to them or kind of speak, you don't have to say so many things to people like employees in Japanese, right? They have to be super polite to you, but you don't have to say so much to them. So that's an extra layer there.
And you learn there's kind of a script that you don't really stray from. Whereas in the US, people have their own little quips that they might add, either the cashier or the customer.
Yeah.
In Japan, it's like customer service interactions. There's just sort of a script that you stick to.
Yeah.
And it's very rare to have small talk or kind of improvised little interactions. I'm sure there's exceptions that prove every rule, but as a general rule, at least where I am in Tokyo, you just kind of follow the script. And it just takes time to get used to what that is.
Yep. Yeah. Like, and if you really try to engage with an employee, like maybe their boss might even get angry at them because they're not supposed to be doing that.
True. Where I'm at
like
in
the only
country,
kind of place. You can go ahead, Ryan.
I'm going to jump in because where I'm at in the countryside, there's still a script, I guess, but they do also engage in small talk, especially if it's a more less corporate environment, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking that exactly. Yeah. Like, especially like the little mom and pop kind of places. Yeah. They like to chit chat, but once it's like a proper corporate kind of story, they can't do that.
Yeah. It becomes more standardized the bigger the company is.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I'll share one, and you know what? Like, this is kind of cheating because it's not really a mistake at all on my part. It's actually a mistake on the part of the person that I was talking to, but it's still kind of a funny like communication misunderstanding that happened. So I thought I'd share it. All right, so the fact that I happen to be legally blind, and so this plays an important part in the story. So I can see a lot of stuff, but I can't see, for example, regular size text. So if I'm looking for something in a store, I may have to ask for help from the employee just to make sure I don't grab the wrong thing. So I was working in Japan. I was living in Kobe, and I was in a rush to get to work, to school. It happened to be one of the sports days. So it was a Saturday because those happen on Saturdays usually. And so I was rushing out. I didn't have breakfast. I might have overslept even. And so I just wanted to get something really quick from the convenience store, which was right before the train station that I was going to get on. And so I wanted, I think I wanted two like tuna mayo, right? Like two tuna mayo, mayonnaise, rice balls, onigiri. And so I asked the clerk, I explained, I'm sorry, I can't see so well. Can you help me? I want 2 of these rice balls. And so he grabs them for me, and then he rings it up. He puts it in a bag, and I'm in a rush, right? And so I just grabbed the bag and I probably put it in my backpack, and I run out and I go to the sports day, and I end up not eating. Like I just left it in my backpack. And so the whole day ends, and it was probably like around 1 or 2 o'clock when I finally get to go home, and I'm in the train station nearest to my school waiting for the train to go home, and I'm hungry. So I reach into the plastic bag, and what I get is 2 sandwiches, 2 tuna mayonnaise sandwiches. And I'm like, what the hell? I clearly said onigiri, and yet I got 2 sandwiches. So of course the joke between me and everybody that I tell this story to is like, he was like, no, you're a foreigner. You actually don't want an onigiri. Let me tell you what you want. I think you want a sandwich. You're gonna like a sandwich better. And he grabbed it for me, and so like I will always remember this because I was so disappointed, but also so amused at the same time.
You know how those sandwiches, they're usually cut in half, and one is tuna and one is like egg salad or something?
Oh, yeah.
If they actually both were tuna, I'd call that a win, because usually you have to put up with the egg salad half, and I always just want double tuna.
That's true. I don't remember that part, but all I remember is like reaching in there and not finding rice balls, finding sandwiches.
If you made it out without egg salad, that's a win in my book.
But I think just to generalize from here, is there's a lot of times when even if you speak the right Japanese, this has happened to me before, but like the Japanese person, like it either takes them a little while to kind of get that you're speaking to them in Japanese, or there's even been one time where I tried to ask directions from an older guy, and he basically just walked away from me. Like, he's like, no, I'm not having this. He just walked away.
You speak English like a proper foreigner. I won't help you.
Yeah.
I think that's come up before in our podcast, Tokyo Explosion, and probably on yours as well. I can't remember specifically, but there is kind of a phenomenon where, even in Tokyo, I still get this a lot, where the person, be it in a customer service interaction or just a random encounter, is so expecting you to speak English that they're already like doing the mental work of preparing for English and to reply in English. And then by the time they realize you're speaking Japanese, they're already too far in that mindset. And I have to admit, I do the opposite sometimes, where I'm ready to speak Japanese. And then maybe like sometimes in the morning when I'm walking my dog, I might not wear glasses or contacts and I can't see until somebody's close. I'm not legally blind, but I need corrective vision stuff, whatever you call it. Corrective vision stuff. That's the term. I know. Yeah. So sometimes I'm walking my dog and there's a few other foreigners that live in my neighborhood and I won't recognize that it's them until they're quite close. And I'll already be ready to say my pleasantries in Japanese. And they're like, hey, what's up? And I'm like taken aback and it takes me a second or two to respond in English. And sometimes I might just blurt out something in Japanese. So I can kind of feel where that comes from, I guess. Yeah. No, definitely. And like, I mean, I've been through that too. And I think the kind of, I guess, policy that I've come to kind of take on for myself is I start the interaction. And if I see that it will be easier to just speak to the person in English because their English is at a certain level, then I don't care. I don't take pride in the fact that I could speak to them in Japanese. I just go for the English. But if I see that we're not getting anywhere in English, then I will switch to Japanese. It's like, let's just get this interaction over with because I'm just asking for directions. I don't need to teach you how to tell me to get to this part of Kyoto. Like, And I've been on the other side of that as well. So no shade in any direction. Things happen.
Right. Yeah, it's just efficiency. You just need to get your point across and move on with your day.
So I was worried today I didn't have a news story for mistakes I made, but if awkward things like this count, then I have two stories.
Oh, okay. Well, you can start with one then, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah.
Well, one is almost exactly like what you were describing. I actually went to a konbini, and this was like a decade ago when I was living in Osaka, so I don't even remember what I was buying, but the clerk saw me and decided that he wanted to interact completely in English.
Yeah.
And his English was awful. To the extent that I actually in Japanese was like, I'm sorry, I don't understand you. Can we use Japanese? And he just kept on going in English. And I was just like, here's money. I hope I get change and I'm going to leave now.
Yeah. Definitely.
So the other one happened last week. And I'm not positive it's because I was using Japanese, but that's my only suspicion, unless the guy was just weird. I was at my friend's place because we were having like a game night. And he ordered Uber Eats. And we've done that a lot. And they just usually ring your doorbell and walk away because of Corona. They don't even like hand it to you. And this guy called, the driver, we think, called about 10 minutes after. And my friend's Japanese is lower than mine. So he asked me to answer the call. So I put it on speaker and I answered kind of pretending I was my friend since it would be confusing otherwise. And he just said, Uber Eats desu kedo. And I was like, okay, hi, I'm my friend's name. Is there, like, what's up? And he just repeats, Uber Eats desu kedo. And I was just like, yeah, okay. Uber Eats desu kedo. And he did this like 4 times. And eventually I was just like,
finish the sentence.
Yeah, like in Japanese, like, I understand your Uber Eats. Is there a problem? Is it late? Are you lost? Please tell me more.
Yep.
And then, Uber Eats desu kedo. So eventually my friend just like took the phone and like walked outside for a couple of minutes and I guess found him. I don't know what the issue was. But
that was just his way of announcing that Uber Eats is here, right?
They don't normally call though. They just like ring your doorbell and leave. So that's why like I have no clue what was going on with that guy.
That actually reminded me, not too long ago, I went to a local butcher shop and they have like some olives out on display and I ordered the meat that I wanted and then I just grabbed a bag of their like homemade olives. And when I was checking out, he asked, Tsumetai no? Like the cold one. And I was like, what? I had no idea what he meant. And I just looked at him lost, like, sumimasen. And he eventually was like, oh, we have a cold version of these olives. Would you like these that you put on the counter or the cold ones that we have in the back? And I was like, well, I put these on the counter, so I guess I want these. But it took me a long time to figure out, like, because Japanese is a low context language, right? Or high, which direction does high context? Yeah. You're the academic one.
I know.
It's a context language.
There is context involved, and sometimes you really have to do some of the legwork to figure out what people are trying to say. Yeah,
there's plenty of deskedos, and then like that like you could translate that as but. So for example, the guy was saying Uber Eats, so but. And then he wasn't finishing the sentence, right? Like there's a lot of that in Japanese. And
yes,
when you're in a conversation, you can kind of figure it out. But when it's out of nowhere and you're not expecting it, it can be confusing.
My guess is he just wanted us to come out to get the food, but they never probably do that. That's like really irregular for them.
Yeah. All right. Ryan, would you mind reading the first listener submission, which is actually from a friend of mine who we will just call M. And she's from Canada. She lived in Japan for quite a while, and she's a pretty proficient Japanese speaker, but this was probably back before she was as good as she is now. So
okay.
Would you mind reading the first one?
So this says, my friend was going to pick me up from the station, and she said she'll meet me at the Rootari. And in my mind, I assumed she meant lottery, without thinking that lottery in Japanese is takarakuji. So I waited for her at the place that sells lottery tickets. I didn't realize she had meant rotary, which is the roundabout in front of the station for pickup and drop-offs.
The Rootari, right? But I mean, there's a lot of katakana, like, foreign origin words in Japanese that sound like English words. So your instinct, if you don't know any better, is to translate it to the thing that it sounds like, but it means something totally different.
Yep.
And rotary is a word in English too. So if you don't know it, then you assume the wrong thing, and it can definitely be confusing. I think.
Yeah. Also, in English, a roundabout's not a rotary.
A roundabout's not a rotary. What's a rotary in English then?
Rotary to me is just something that like spins.
Well, this actually is pretty relevant. My station, Higashikitazawa, they've recently been kind of renovating, and they installed a rotary, and my wife was using the word with her family in Japanese, and I had never really heard it in that context, but it's I easily could have made the same mistake that Im made just a few days ago before I figured out what it actually meant. It's just like a taxi rank, or it's a circle where buses and taxis can come in and go out.
Yeah.
Or any
and they're
cars.
very common at especially bigger train stations.
Right in front of a station. So it's just a little circle for traffic.
Yeah. Rotary. All right, let's do one more, and then maybe we'll take a break. So, Kyle, would you mind doing the next one?
Oh, I would be honored, because this is from my pal Cal, right?
Yes, from one of the co-hosts of the Tokyo Explosion podcast.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Cal, for submitting that. I was very happy to read who it was from. So,
yeah, it brought a tear to my eye when I saw. I know I'm in good hands when Cal sends a submission. So here it goes. Hey guys, here's my embarrassing story. I was studying in Sapporo in 2011 and had right about intermediate level Japanese, but still didn't understand the context of terms like aitsu and koitsu when referring to people. My Japanese friends use these terms frequently, and I just thought they were different ways of saying this guy or that person. I was out with a few Japanese coworkers, and the boss of the eikaiwa I was working at, and everyone was speaking Japanese. We got to talking about which kids we thought were the cutest, and when someone brought up a favorite of mine, I said, "Aitsu mecha kawaii desu yo." Or, there's no des. "Aitsu mecha kawaii yo ne." That's what he said. Okay. I finally understood the context of them when I saw the mild looks of horror on my coworkers' faces, and haven't made the mistake since. Hope this is the kind of thing you were looking for. Keep up the good work. Cal from Tokyo Explosion.
Yes, definitely. So what he said there was mecha kawaii yo ne, right? And so mecha, just in this case, very, and then kawaii, of course, cute. Yone is just kind of like,
isn't
right?
It? Yeah.
Something like that in this case. So the word here is aitsu, right? Aitsu, koitsu, soitsu. These are these words to refer to people, but they are quite casual, informal, or even kind of rough and vulgar. Like it's the kind of things that you would hear like a kind of a young rough and tumble kind of guy, saying, when they're talking with the guys, like, oh, this dude here, you wouldn't say it as a teacher, generally referring to your students for the most part, right? So generally, like referring to people in Japanese can be a little confusing, I think, when you first start learning the language, right? Because your instinct is, of course, to just say you and them, and that's about it. But for the most part, you use titles, or if you want to be really formal, you would use kochira, or, like kono kata, like this person. You're kind of indirect about it. But, koitsu, aitsu, like that's really direct, really too much for a lot of, more formal kind of proper talking situations. So
my wife described it as it kind of turns the people into objects in a way.
I think
you're referring to them as like a thing.
Yeah. No, that's yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
I think this is one of those things that like, I don't know their background, but in anime and stuff, you hear those terms frequently, but in real life, you don't.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, unless you're like joking around with your friends that are about your own age, and like you speak a certain way with that kind of relationship. But once you're in the work area, or speaking to people you don't know that well, you generally wouldn't use that kind of language.
I had a friend just the other day who's like kind of a beginner in Japanese, who was asking about like when to use like zo and zei, like ikuzo. And I was like, well, unless you're being like sarcastic, pretty much never.
Yeah. Like you have to like knowingly use it, right? Yeah, I think you have to get to the point where the person you are talking to understands that that you are using it somewhat like that, like ironically, right? Yeah.
I will say that was a pretty big stumbling block for me learning how to speak Japanese, is just referring to other people. You kind of don't need to most of the time.
Exactly.
You can just drop it and say the second part of the sentence and they'll know what you mean.
But
in English, everything is, you always have to have a subject, an object, a verb, whatever. That's you have to include all those pieces. Where when I'm talking to Tony, I would say you, blah blah blah. But there's basically no need to do that most of the time in Japanese. And I had a similar mistake early on, right when we moved to the Shimokitazawa area. We went to some bar and people were playing cards, and we joined in on the card game. And I referred to this kind of rough and tumble type of guy at the table. I called him Omai, which is like, it's also kind of the same. You might hear it in anime or in Yakuza games or whatever, referring to somebody else. But for a stranger that you just met, even though it wasn't a bar in a card game, it was it was definitely awkward. And there's a little bit of like tension there for a minute. And my wife kind of had to like apologize and explain like that's not really a polite way to refer to people. So I think it's a kind of common mistake to make early on.
Yeah, my basic advice for beginners would be like, don't say anything or just use their name.
Just be quiet. Don't say anything.
Yeah. Like in English, you would say, how about you, if you're like asking a question. But in Japanese, I would just be like, Tony-san wa?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, use their name.
I think often, and this, what you described, Kyle, I think happens to a lot of people where you whether it's on purpose or by accident, you see how far you can go, so to speak, right? You see how casual you can get, and then you realize, oh, I went too casual, and then you end up pulling back a bit, and then like that becomes your new like limit, and then you kind of have to feel it out again, like little by little.
I actually have a perfect example here that this was in a few of my options of things to mention, but it kind of came up naturally. Yeah. And it's a good learning lesson, because I think a good general rule is to kind of follow native speakers when you're learning a language and when you're in their country. But there's a risk in Japanese because of the politeness levels based on relationship and based on status. Mm-hmm. And you may be copying somebody who has a different relationship with somebody else or has a different status than you. Too, yeah. That can kind of, you're probably fine as a foreigner learning the language, but it might lead to a little bit of embarrassment. And that happened with me with my wife's dad early on when I met him. I'm in a foreign country. I'm meeting my wife's family. There's plenty of nerves and reasons to be a little bit nervous.
Sure.
And I was just kind of following my wife's lead on a lot of things. And my wife and her dad, obviously, they have a close relationship as father and daughter. And my wife's kind of nickname for him is Oji-san, old man, Oji-san. Yeah. So either she calls him weird uncle, Oji-san, and like weird old man, Oji-san. She'll use either one.
Yeah.
But I was like, what should I call? Should I call him Oto-san? Should I call him like Kurita-san, like his family name?
Yeah.
And she calls him Oji-san so much that I called him that once. And everybody just like burst out laughing. And I could tell her dad was a little bit embarrassed. And I was like, oh, sumimasen. Like, I know you're not an old man, but that's what she calls you. So I got mixed up.
Yeah. Sometimes you absorb things without realizing that like it's not something you would normally use, right?
Right. Yeah. So be careful there.
Definitely, yeah. But again, the fact that you remember this stuff, means you learned your lesson and now you know.
Honestly, making the mistakes is the best way to learn because you'll never do it again.
Yep.
Exactly.
Having a room full of people laughing. The
ones that result in the whole room laughing at you. Best lessons ever, right?
And I don't think anybody avoids at least a few things like that happening if you're learning a language, especially Japanese, just because there's so much that you just have to learn by doing. And
Absolutely.
So like getting over that compulsion that some people may have to be perfect or not be a little bit silly every once in a while. You need to get over that when learning a language. That's a lesson I'm still learning, and I think a lot of us are still learning.
Oh, yeah. We all struggle with it. But, you got to remind yourself, well, hey, now I have a funny story, and now I can make people laugh with
Now I can go on a podcast.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you can go on a podcast.
Yeah, think of it that way. Go out and make mistakes so that you can have interesting stories on podcasts.
Exactly. Yep. All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with more funny stories. Hey, it's commercial time. So recently, it seems like a lot of new people have been discovering the show because last month was the most downloaded month ever for Ichimon Japan by quite a margin, actually. And this month seems like it's going to be another really, really good month. New record by quite a margin again. So welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for finding the show. And remember that there's quite a backlog of episodes. We've been doing this for over a year, and we always do our best to make content that is, as they say in the industry, right? Evergreen. So that just means that even though it was released like a year ago, you can still enjoy it now. And you will probably be able to enjoy it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now because we do our best to do things in a way that will be enjoyable for a long time, right? These are topics that don't get old super quickly. They're not like super topical or anything. So you can also find all the show notes at japankyo.com/ichimonjapan in case your podcast app has trouble with HTML or certain kinds of links, or you want to like find one of the videos that I mentioned, like because I embed them in the full version of the show notes, then go check it out at japankyo.com/ichimonjapan. And japankyo.com is just the website that I run. I started doing news articles, translating them from Japanese to English, and it's basically turned into the place where I post everything about the podcasts. And every once in a while, I still write an article, but I just don't really have time to write articles anymore. But whenever I can, I try to sneak one in. Also, one other thing that you may not be aware of if you're new is that I sell some t-shirts and stuff, especially inspired by things that we talk about on this show. So if you want to support the show and get yourself a fun, silly, cool t-shirt, then go check out kimitodesigns.com. That's KIMITO designs.com. And lastly, I also put out another podcast. Actually, I released 3 podcasts about Japan. This one, Japanese Plus Alpha, which is for the patrons over at japankyo.com/Patreon. And lastly, Japan Station, which is actually the first one that I started. And on the latest episode, we talk about erotic comics in Japan, which is a very interesting topic. Maybe it doesn't appeal to you, but it should, because there's a lot of connections with like mainstream anime and manga, and also a lot of like social issues that arise from these kinds of things. So we have a really interesting conversation with Dr. Patrick W. Galbraith, who is an expert on all things related to Akihabara. Really interesting guy. It's actually his 3rd time on the show, and that just goes to show that I really enjoy talking to him, and I think that he has some really, really good insights in a lot of this, anime, manga, and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's called Japan Station, episode 59. You can find it at japanstationpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so let's get into the second half of the show. All right, so we're back with more funny stories. Let's get into the next listener story, which happens to be from Sean Connolly, who follows us on Twitter and is a patron. I've interacted with him a few times, so thank you so much, Sean. And he shared a story on Twitter. So Ryan, could you share that one?
First, also, thank you, Sean. Then he says, working with my tutor, instead of telling her the items were Yasui, which means cheap, I kept using Yasai. So they would say, was the suit expensive? And he would respond, no, it was vegetables, because Yasai means vegetables. She tried holding it together, but when I realized it too, I thought she was going to cry laughing so hard. She's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you make mistakes like repeatedly and you don't realize it. And then you have this like epiphany moment where you go, oh my God, the last like 2 years I've been saying this horrible thing.
I hope it wasn't 2 years.
I've definitely done the Yasui Yasai before.
Really?
Absolutely.
Well, 2 years is an arbitrary number, but I mean, it definitely happens where you repeat it and you realize later on where you go like, whoa.
I don't believe I've done this one, but I think it's completely understandable. You could even conjugate vegetables like yasakatta.
Yasakatta. Yeah, because it ends in the E. You can conjugate it just like an adjective. Yes, yasakatta. Very vegetably. All right, so let's go into... So, Kyle, could you read then the next one, who was it was submitted by Patty, who is a listener. She emailed at let me see, Ichimon at japankyo.com. She sent the email and she sent a couple of stories. So thank you so much, Patty. So can you start with the first one, Kyle?
Of course. Hi, Tony. I loved your podcast. While listening to the recent podcast about foreigners and their mistakes made in Japan, I recalled one of my worst blunders. I stayed on Awaji Island as an exchange student several years ago and still visit regularly. At the end of a big meal at a nice restaurant, I really wanted to treat my host family to the meal, since they have always been so kind to me. I said to them, very seriously, since I knew they would need to be convinced, Haraitai. Haraitai. I knew my Japanese wasn't perfect. I didn't have a dictionary with me, but I thought they would be able to understand what I was trying to say. Instead, my host mother looked quite concerned because she thought I had said Haraitai. Haraitai. It is kind of hard. They're kind of
yeah. You got to get the intonation and the what's it called? The rhythm to it.
Pronunciation and intonation is a whole nother level of Japanese study that I've barely broached. So she has never. So this is Patty again. Patty's host mother has never let her forget and often mentions it when they see each other.
So haraitai means I want to pay, but haraitai means my stomach hurts. And it's not just my stomach hurts, because she's using the word hara, which is stereotypically more of a like man kind of word. Like guys would usually use it more often than a woman would. So it's kind of like this rough way of saying like, oh, my gut hurts, like so of course the host mom would be concerned all of a sudden, like, wait, what, are you okay? Like after you ate this meal, but Patty just wanted to say, no, I want to pay for you guys. So yeah, very, very easy thing to happen. I think I'm sure Patty's not the only one that's had this kind of experience.
Yeah. Hopefully they let her pay. After all that.
Oh yeah. Hopefully after all that.
Because that is a thing for sure.
Yeah.
My old landlord, we used to go out together every once in a while, and he was just really good to us. And every once in a while I wanted to treat him because he was always doing nice things for us. And it was just not going to happen. He was not going to let us pay.
Yeah. That happens a lot. Yeah, usually if you're the younger person in the interaction, the older person will really be pushy about paying, and eventually you just have to give up because they definitely won't let it go.
Yeah.
I've gotten a few free meals from that. It's always nice, but you definitely have to at least show the intent that you want to pay.
Yep.
All right, let's get into the second one. The second one I really enjoyed, but not to say I didn't enjoy the other one, but the next one I particularly enjoyed.
This one's also from Patty. She says, we were riding bikes around the Chiba area looking for a zoo that we had heard about. After getting totally lost, my husband, who is incidentally Japanese American but speaks only a little Japanese, stopped an elderly man and asked him, Daibutsu wa doko desu ka? The man was completely baffled and muttered something about Kamakura and then walked away.
All right, let's explain. So they were looking for a zoo. In Japanese, zoo is Doobutsuen, right? Literally, it's animal garden, but that comes from zoological garden in English, I believe. So, and Daibutsu are these like big Buddha statues. And so there's a famous one in Kamakura. So that's why I guess the guy said like Kamakura. But Chiba Prefecture is quite a long way away from Kamakura. So the guy was probably like absolutely confused. Like, why the heck are they asking me about the big Buddha statue when you're like nowhere near it?
Yeah, this would be like if you're in like California and you just ask a random dude, like, where's Mount Rushmore? Just on the street.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, I can tell you, but I don't know why you're asking me. Yeah. And like there's always an extra layer of awkwardness and confusion for anybody that looks Asian but can't speak Japanese in Japan. I'm not in that category, but I've had roommates, I've had friends that are Asian, and their Japanese was like at a lower level than mine. And so we would go ask for directions and I would ask for directions, but then the Japanese person would be like staring at the Asian person behind me and wondering like, why are they not asking me? Why is this guy asking me?
Yes. Yeah,
So-
that's happened so many times. I have friends who are Asian, from Asian backgrounds, but grew up in like Australia or the US.
Yeah.
And they may speak no Japanese, but then we go out with somebody who's from a different culture that doesn't look like they would speak Japanese, but they've actually have studied it and they're really good at it. But always the server or whoever is looking at the poor Australian guy who barely speaks Japanese just because he's like, his family's from Vietnam or whatever. It makes no sense really, but
Yep.
I have also had that, but recently I've also had the opposite of that, which was kind of cool. So I guess people are learning. I went to a museum with someone who is like born and raised in Japan and speaks Japanese, obviously. But I was there and I don't look Japanese. So when they saw us come in, they looked at me and were like, oh, do you speak Japanese? And I said, yes. Like, oh, okay. Where are you from? And started to ask stuff. And then they looked to her and were like, do you speak Japanese?
Well, that's cool.
And she's just like,
That's nice.
I'm from Japan. Like, oh, okay.
It's good that they did not assume.
Yeah.
Kyle, did you think of anything else, or are we okay?
yeah, I can maybe give a couple final points here.
Sure.
Some of your listeners may be more beginner level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of how I heard it put is, in Japanese, you don't know exactly the right way to phrase something until you've heard a native speaker say it or you've kind of encountered it naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I guess kind of what I mean by that is sometimes you're translating from English to Japanese, which is not always a natural course to take. Translating from English, it doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one to Japanese. So in textbooks, they'll teach you kind of set phrases that mostly work, but remember that context is really important in Japan and kind of your audience who you're speaking to. So early on, this led to a lot of headaches and not really embarrassing, but just kind of learning moments for me is using some of these set phrases that I learned from a textbook. One of them, which made people laugh, and I just had to quickly forget that it even exists and stop using it. And the textbook was "Dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu." So very rarely, like maybe if you're meeting like your significant other's grandmother for the first time or something, but if you're going out to a bar or like meeting people around your same age, they're just going to laugh at you if you say that because it's so formal and heavy and serious sounding. You can drop like any one of those words and be fine. You can just say yoroshiku onegai shimasu or yoroshiku even in some cases. But again, you're doing that politeness dance that Tony mentioned where you're trying to figure out how casual can I take it? How formal does it need to be? Dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu is for most examples, it's too formal.
Yeah, like the textbooks generally err on the side of the super formal. And so you that's what you're taught a lot of times, and then you kind of eventually, if you stick to it long enough, you realize like, oh, I can minimize this, I can take it lower and lower and lower. But I guess out of an abundance of caution, textbooks generally like start at the very top, almost outside of like service industry honorific language. Like they don't really delve too much into that, but that's for most people, they don't need to even learn that. So
honestly, that whole like self-introduction script, you don't use it very often.
Yeah.
Not really. Yeah.
Like if you're ever in a situation where there's like a big group of people and they're like, oh, please introduce yourself, you'll use it there.
Mhm.
But that's a pretty rare circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like when you, for example, work as an English teacher or on the JET program in Japan, there's moments where you do your like kind of, pre-rehearsed speech. But outside of that, generally, you're not given a little speech to introduce yourself to every single person you're meeting,
Yeah, I'm just thinking like if I went up to just some dude, like, I don't know, like in my music school, like one of my teachers, and I introduced myself with that, it would be really awkward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one I used to do a lot. I don't think this is a textbook's fault, but just kind of understanding nuance and failed attempts at translating English into Japanese was I would use minasan, and even like
you sound like a TV personality.
Exactly. Like once one of my first hanamis, some of my wife's friends were there who only speak Japanese. And like asking what the group wanted to do, or if the group wanted a drink or something, I kept referring to them as minasan. But it kind of became like they laughed every time I did it, so I kind of turned it into a joke where then I started to kind of play the part of like a a host or like a TV personality, like minasan ma. Like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you could run with it, then you could. Yeah, that's the best thing to do.
This wasn't a mistake.
And then people remember that. What's that?
So just play it off like it was intentional from the start.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of get a skill for that as a learner as well, because it kind of adds a little bit of spice and makes things interesting.
Yeah.
And as long as you have fun with it, then, just roll with it.
Yeah. I mean, there are certain situations where, having somebody laugh at you can be, kind of hurtful and it can make you sad. But for the most part, if you can find a way to just kind of have fun with it and turn, like we said earlier, but turn that into a funny story and turn that into like fuel for you to keep on going, then, I mean, that's usually the best thing to do and, have a good laugh about it. So, Ryan, do you have anything else you wanted to mention, or are we okay?
Okay, I just kind of remembered one thing that was actually very hilarious.
Let's finish it off with that then.
I'm not sure if I can tell the story right. So, when I was in graduate school with you, there was a Japanese reading club a friend was trying to put together as part of her like SLS something she had to do. And I joined and my roommate joined. And my roommate at the time was still studying Japanese, but he'd never had like experience. His level was pretty good, but he had never like lived in Japan more. He'd been to Japan, but like never for more than a week. So he still was very much of like speaking English translated into Japanese. Like he didn't know the native way the language would flow. And the way the reading club worked is we would like read a chapter of our book and then summarize it. And I didn't read his chapter, so I don't know what the actual Japanese said. But the way he explained it was the most bizarre nonsense story ever. Everyone was bursting out laughing. So it was a story that began with like two samurai, or like a samurai and like his like squire guy. I don't know, like his little servant who was with him. And one of them was wounded. I don't remember. But so I have to like fill in blanks of what I think the Japanese said. There's a verb that's like o, which is like to carry. And it can be used like metaphorically, like to carry a burden or something. I think it was using it like that, like someone was carrying their pain or carrying their sorrow or something. But my friend interpreted it as literally. So he thought the wounded squire guy was like carrying the healthy samurai around on the battlefield just because he had that much authority over him. And I think, again, the samurai guy was trying to encourage him and said, like, shikari shiro, which is like, hang on or something. But if you use a dictionary, shikari, it always says means tight. So my friend interpreted that as the poor wounded man is carrying the rich samurai, he was like walking too shakily. And so the samurai was complaining and being like, Walk tighter, walk smoother.
Yeah, that's oh my god, yeah, stuff like that happens all the time, especially when you first start reading.
Yeah.
Like
everything's literal when you're new to it.
Yeah, with reading, you don't get the immediate feedback, so you just have to try to make sense of it in your head and hope for the best.
The great thing was another member was like a really good artist, so she was like trying to draw this picture as he was describing it. So he was like, okay, I don't really know what's going on, but there's this samurai guy, and like his servant's there, and the servant's wounded, and he's carrying him, and he's like ordering him around. So she drew a picture of this like serious, kind of angry looking samurai riding a wounded peasant who's like bleeding on the ground, almost like a Yoshi in Mario.
It becomes a Monty Python sketch pretty quickly. Like, I want to see a Game of Thrones level production of a huge battle of all the knights being carried by like poor, sickly squires, and they're like yelling at them for being too wobbly while they're swinging their swords at each other.
Quit your whining. Stop shaking so much. Take me over there. Yes, my lord.
On guard.
So this is not a mistake that I made, but this little story reminded me of something, and we'll finish off with this. But so back in the day, like, I mean, probably close to 20 years ago at this point, back when like bootleg Hong Kong anime DVDs were like, you know, super common.
Oh yeah.
I had one of them.
I had a few of those.
There's a lot of those. Like anime. So like anime that was not available in the US would get released, or not released, but you could buy it online, right? And they were like very good quality in terms of the picture quality, but the subtitles a lot of times were awful.
They were done by like Hong Kong high school students who like had questionable Japanese and English ability.
That's what it seemed like. Yeah. So like at the time, you know, my Japanese wasn't great. I could understand some of what was being said, but not enough to really get all of it. So I was still using the subtitles. But you know, the subtitles weren't great. So it was kind of like you would get the general idea of what was going on, but you wouldn't get all the nuance. Right? And there's this one scene in this one show that I was watching. It was one of the follow-ups to Saint Seiya. And there's this scene where a guy is on like his dying breath, right? He's on the floor. Something happened. He's about to die. And he has a baby. He's holding a baby that he was trying to like get away from these, like from somewhere, right? He was trying to run away with this baby. And then somebody comes and finds him. And the guy that's dying, you know, gives him the baby. And then the guy that is okay, that takes the baby, like goes up to the guy and says, "Shikkari shiro," right? Again, same from the samurai guy, because that's typically in movies and anime what you say when somebody's like on the brink of death and you're telling them like, "No, hang on, come back," you know?
Yeah.
But the subtitle said, "Cheer up." And I guess you could translate Shikkari shiro as cheer up in some cases, but definitely not when you're not in when you're talking to somebody that's about to die.
Like, stop whining, man. It's not that bad.
Yeah, stop whining. Cheer up, man. It's like, come on, smile.
Laughter is the best medicine.
Yeah, so I don't promote bootlegs, but I do absolutely love those old, you know, bootlegs because of those subtitles. I had so many laughs because of those subtitles. So yeah, that's something that I will never forget. Like, it made such an impression on me because even at my low Japanese level at the time, like I fully understood that no, this is not cheer up.
And then you saw it in Japanese, like, oh wait a minute, it was cheer up.
Yeah, like I said, it can be in some cases, but definitely not in that one. All right. I think we can wrap up for this episode. First of all, thank you so much to all the listeners who sent something in. I really love hearing from people and knowing that you guys are listening and enjoying the content. That's awesome. That's always wonderful to know. And also, thank you so much to Kyle for sharing the stories and coming back on the show. Links for Tokyo Explosion, which I highly recommend, will be in the show notes. But of course, just for anybody that didn't listen to the other episodes, what can you tell them briefly? What is Tokyo Explosion? What do you guys do?
Yeah, so now we only record 4 times a year. It's quarterly. We meet once per season just to kind of comment on the changing seasons and our lives in Japan as foreigners. But really, it's just an excuse to get a few of my friends together to kind of joke around and have fun for an hour or two. So it's mostly lighthearted comedy stuff, not well researched like Tony and Ryan's show. Just kind of us ruminating and sharing experiences. Sometimes funny mistakes and accidents. Sometimes just crazy improv bits that don't really connect to anything else. Just a fun comedy time.
Yeah, and Cal, whose story we heard a little while ago,
yes,
comes up with games and they're pretty funny. And Cal has some interesting stances on some stuff that often results in some funny interactions. So
yeah, I think we the core three of us, Alec, Cal, and I, we all have kind of different ways of approaching things and thinking about things, and sometimes it causes mostly lighthearted conflict. Like as an example, Alec was really offended once when being shown an apartment by his school. He's an English teacher. When the person showing him the apartment asked him to take his shoes off.
Yeah,
and that's the kind of thing that he'll just be mad about for years at a time.
Yes, I love how like absurdly like angry.
And Cal and I in that case were trying to talk him down, like explain like culturally and how the school is sponsoring him living in that apartment and why it's okay for him to show respect, and that just drives him even further into his stubbornness.
Yes. No, but I love all you guys. I love listening to you guys joke around and talk. So highly recommended. Link in the show notes. And Kyle will be back for another episode, which will probably be out in a month or two from this one, but it's a good one. So definitely keep an eye out for that one. So thank you again, Kyle. And thank you, Ryan. All right. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.